Script generation prompt none create a deeply emotional cinematic story, 30,000 words, where an old grandmother is sitting in her small traditional home with her young grandson or granddaughter. The atmosphere is warm but slightly nostalgic, with dim evening light entering through the window. The grandmother begins to share her life story, filled with tragedies, sacrifices, and lessons. Show her wrinkled hands, soft but tired eyes, and a voice that carries both pain and wisdom. As she speaks, flashbacks appear of her younger days, moments of hardship, loss, and resilience. The child listens with wide, innocent eyes, sometimes holding her hand, sometimes asking tender questions. The story should highlight themes of love, loss, survival, and hope. Make it heartfelt, realistic, and visually cinematic, so that the audience feels both the pain of her past and the warmth of her bond with her grandchild. Her gaze lingered on the child for a moment, then drifted past, beyond the walls, beyond the twilight, into places no one else could see. The silence grew thicker, like a curtain about to be drawn aside. Her lips parted slightly, and with the faintest sigh, the years began to fold backward. The light in the room dimmed, but in her mind another light appeared. Softer, brighter, the glow of mornings long past. She was no longer in the chair by the window, but barefoot in the earth of her village. A little girl with tangled hair and eyes that had never yet known sorrow. The ground was warm, the soil rich with the scent of rain from the night before. The voices of her parents carried from the fields, a chorus of labor and laughter, weaving into the hum of cicadas. She remembered chasing fireflies at dusk, their tiny bodies flashing like lanterns in her cupped hands. She remembered the lullabies her mother would sing while stirring the fire, her voice worn but tender, filling the small house with comfort. She remembered lying beside her siblings under a patched quilt, listening to the distant howls of dogs and the steady breath of the earth settling into sleep. Life had been simple then. Hunger was a shadow, but it had not yet reached them fully. The world felt full and her heart was unbroken. There were mornings when she believed the sun rose just for her, when she thought her laughter alone could keep the sky clear. But even in these memories, there was a trembling edge, like a thread pulled too tightly. She remembered her father's hands, calloused and cracked, and the way his back bent lower each season. She remembered the quiet conversations at night, words whispered in fear when they thought the children were asleep. She remembered her mother's eyes, how they sometimes filled with worry even as she smiled. The fireflies faded. The voices grew heavier. The air salted, thickened with a weight that did not belong to childhood. And somewhere in that remembered silence, the first shadow of sorrow began to take shape. The girl ran barefoot along the narrow path that wound through the fields, her laughter rising above the rustle of tall grass. The earth was warm beneath her soles, rough and familiar, marked with stones she had long since learned to avoid. The smell of smoke drifted from the hearth at home, mingling with the sweetness of ripening fruit in the orchards. Her world was small but complete. A mud brick house with a sagging roof, a well where water glimmered dark and cool, fields that stretched just far enough to make the horizon seem endless. The air carried the cries of neighbors, the clatter of tools, the gentle hum of a community bound by the same soil and the same struggle. Evenings belonged to fireflies. She would chase them with her little brother, their hands reaching into the dusk as the creatures blinked in and out of sight. Tiny fragments of light against the gathering dark. They would carry them home in jars, watching them glow like stars captured in glass, until sleep claimed them and the insects were released again into the night. Inside, her mother's voice filled the room, low and steady, a melody woven into the crackle of burning wood. Her father's presence was quieter, shaped by exhaustion. His hands bore the weight of fields tilled and harvests carried. His back bent lower each season, yet he rose each dawn without complaint. He was a man of few words, but when he did speak, his voice carried the certainty of earth itself. But shadows always crept into corners. Food was never plentiful, and meals were stretched with water, with herbs, with whatever the land could offer. There were days when her stomach ached with emptiness, though her mother pressed a smile onto her lips, as if joy itself might fill them. Whispers carried between her parents at night. Words too hushed to understand, yet heavy enough to bend the air. One winter struck harder than the rest, saying the earth turned cruel beneath frost, and the fields gave little. The girl remembered watching her father's hands tremble as he divided what little food they had. She remembered the way her mother sat by the fire longer than usual, staring into the flames as though they might speak answers. She remembered curling against her siblings, their bodies thin, their breaths shallow in the bitter cold. That was the winter when she first understood that life could take as easily as it gave. The warmth of her mother's lullabies could not always keep hunger from gnawing. The strength in her father's shoulders could not always push the frost back from their door. Childhood was still hers, but its edges had begun to fray. Yet even in hardship, there was beauty. On mornings when frost glistened on the branches, she would run outside and watch the light scatter into shards of silver. On nights when the wind rattled the shutters, she and her brother would tell stories beneath their quilt. Each word an ember that kept them warm. The fireflies always returned in summer, and with them the laughter she refused to lose. The memory held both brightness and shadow, as if her young life was a fabric stitched from joy and sorrow in equal measure. She had not yet known grief in its fullest shape, but the world was already teaching her that nothing remained untouched by struggle. And beyond those early years, darker lessons waited. The sky changed first. It was no longer the quiet blue she had known as a child, but a restless grey, torn apart by sounds she had never heard before. The ground itself seemed to tremble beneath distant thunder, though no storm had come. The grown-ups spoke in whispers, faces drawn tight, eyes fixed on horizons as if waiting for something terrible to appear. At first, she did not understand. She saw only that her father came home later, his steps heavier, his silence deeper. She saw her mother bend over the table with worry that no smile could disguise. The village itself changed. Laughter grew rarer, and the songs that once rose at dusk fell away into a tense hush. Then came the soldiers. She remembered the clatter of boots on the road, the glint of metal in the sun. Voices barked commands she could not follow, words that cut through the air like blades. Neighbors pulled their children close, shutters slammed shut. But the sound of fear seeped through every wall. The girl clung to her mother's skirt. Her heart pounding with a terror she could not name. Hunger deepened. Crops were taken, animals slaughtered or stolen. The little that remained was divided thinner than ever. Nights were filled with silence, broken only by the distant echo of gunfire. Each shot a reminder that the world beyond their home was unraveling. One evening, her father did not return. She sat waiting by the door, the last rays of light sinking into the fields. Her mother kept her hands busy, though her eyes betrayed what her lips would not speak. The hours stretched into a silence heavier than stone. And when the night passed without him, the silence turned into grief. Days later, they learned he had been taken. Whether to fight, to labor, or to vanish into the shadows of war, they never truly knew. His absence hollowed the house. The little girl listened for his footsteps each dusk. Listen, until listening itself became an ache she carried in her chest. The world grew sharper after that. She saw her mother's face harden, saw her hands blister as she worked twice as much to keep the family alive. She saw neighbors disappear, their homes left in eerie stillness. She saw hunger carve lines into her siblings' faces, saw illness creep in when food could no longer keep their bodies strong. One night, she heard the distant cry of a woman wailing in the village. The sound pierced the air, raw and unending, and though she did not know whose name was being mourned, she understood something final had happened. Childhood had ended in that cry. Yet even amid the ruin, she held on to fragments of light. A loaf of bread shared among neighbors, a fire that lasted the whole night. A moment of laughter when her brother made faces in the dark, trying to keep fear at bay. These small sparks burned against the vast darkness, fragile but fierce. She learned, in those years, that survival was not only about food and shelter. It was about holding on to hope, about refusing to let despair claim the last corners of the heart. But the war was not finished with her. It had only just begun to take